Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. And today we're plugging into a topic that's really got some juice. Electric vehicle maintenance.
Ooh, I like that. Plugging in, get it, because EVs.
Uh-huh, yeah,
Yeah.
you got it.
All right, I'll stop.
But in all seriousness, this is something I know a lot of you have been curious about, especially with more and more people making the switch to electric.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a ton of information out there. Sometimes it can be tough to sort through it all.
Exactly. That's where we come in. We're going straight to the source. Reddit. You know, that online community where people just love to share their experiences and opinions on, well, pretty much everything.
Oh, yeah, Reddit. It's like a treasure trove of real-world insights and sometimes pretty entertaining stories, too.
And trust me, the EV community on Reddit is buzzing. People are talking about everything from battery care to charging tips to those funny little quirks that come with owning an electric car.
Speaking of quirks, one thing that always makes me chuckle is this whole myth that EVs require zero maintenance.
Oh yeah, I've heard that one too. But I have a feeling the reality is a bit more nuanced.
You got that right. Just because an EV has fewer moving parts doesn't mean you can completely ignore maintenance.
So let's bust that myth right off the bat. What are some of the key things EV owners should be paying attention to?
Well, first and foremost, the battery. That's the heart and soul of your EV, right?
Absolutely. Got to keep that battery active.
Exactly. And then you've got your tire suspension and that nifty regenerative braking system, which we'll dive into a bit later.
Sounds good. So let's start with the battery, because I've seen a ton of chatter on Reddit about avoiding constantly charging to 100%.
Right.
Why is that such a big deal?
It's all about those lithium-ion batteries. They're the workhorses of most EVs. But they're also a bit sensitive. You don't want to push them to their limits all the time.
Kind of like how you shouldn't run a marathon every day.
Right. Perfect analogy. Constantly charging to 100% and then draining it down to near zero can actually shorten the battery's lifespan.
So it's more like a slow and steady wins the race kind of situation for
Yeah.
EV batteries.
Exactly. And there's a lot of science behind it. It can cause something called plating on the battery's electrodes, which reduces its ability to hold a charge over time.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So what's the sweet spot? What percentage should we be aiming for when we charge?
Most experts and even EV manufacturers recommend staying within the 20–80% range.
Okay. So kind of like keeping it in that Goldilocks zone.
Yeah,
Not too full, not too empty.
you got it. And this isn't just some theory. We found a Reddit user who claimed to have maintained over 80% battery capacity even after driving 200,000 kilometers.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
What was their secret?
They were religious about following that 20–80% charging routine.
A little battery mindfulness goes a long way, it seems.
It really does. What about fast charging?
Yeah, I've heard mixed things about that. Is it always a no-no?
Not necessarily, but it's something to be mindful of. Faster charging is great when you're in a pinch, but it does generate more heat.
And heat is bad for the battery.
Right. It
Yeah.
can cause wear and tear over time.
So everything in moderation.
Exactly. We found some great advice from a Tesla owner on Reddit. They recommended reserving fast charging for emergencies only and sticking to slower charging methods whenever possible.
Makes sense.
Oh.
So we've talked about the battery. What about those other maintenance items you mentioned, like tires, suspension, and brakes?
Ah, yes. Those are important too. And you know what? Even on those EV-specific forums, you still see people asking about the basics, like tire rotations and pressure checks.
So even seasoned EV enthusiasts need those reminders sometimes.
It happens to the best of us. But we'll delve into all those other maintenance must-dos in our next deep dive.
Stay tuned, folks.
Welcome back to the deep dive, where we're still cruising along with all things EV maintenance, and this time we're shifting gears to the brakes.
Yeah, brakes. It feels like there's this idea out there that EVs don't really need much brake maintenance because of that regenerative braking thing.
Right, regenerative braking. It's pretty cool. It does help reduce wear and tear on those traditional friction brakes.
So less wear and tear,
Mm.
but that doesn't mean no maintenance at all.
Exactly. It's not a free pass to completely ignore your brakes.
Gotcha. So tell me more about this regenerative braking. How does it actually work?
Okay, so basically when you lift your foot off the accelerator in an EV, the electric motor actually reverses and acts as a generator. This creates resistance, which slows the car down, and also captures some of that energy and sends it back to the battery.
Oh, wow. So it's like a 2-for-1 deal. Slowing down the car and recharging the battery at the same time.
Yep. Pretty neat, huh?
It is. But you said it doesn't completely eliminate the need for those traditional friction brakes.
Right, that's because regenerative braking is most effective at higher speeds. When you're coming to a slow stop or driving at low speeds, those friction brakes still need to kick in to bring the car to a complete halt.
Makes sense. So that's like a tag team effort. Regenerative braking does most of the heavy lifting, but those friction brakes are there for backup.
Exactly. And even with regenerative braking, those friction brakes will still wear down over time, just at a slower rate.
So brake maintenance is still a thing, even in the EV world.
Absolutely. We actually found a real-world example on Reddit that illustrates this perfectly. A Tesla owner reported experiencing brake disc problems after just 50,000 kilometers.
Oh, wow. 50,000 kilometers. That's not that much.
Right. It just goes to show that even with regenerative braking, you can't neglect those brakes altogether.
So what should EV owners be doing to keep their brakes in tip-top shape?
Well, it's still a good idea to get those brakes inspected regularly, just like you would with a gas-powered car.
Okay. And what about brake fluid? Do EVs use that too?
Yes, they do. And it's important to get that brake fluid flushed and replaced according to the manufacturer's recommendations.
Gotcha. So it's basically the same brake maintenance routine as a gas car, just maybe a bit less frequent.
Exactly. And speaking of routine maintenance, let's dive into some of the other gems we found on Reddit about keeping your EV running smoothly.
Okay, spill the tea. What kind of wisdom did you uncover from those Reddit experts?
Well, one user shared a super simple maintenance checklist that anyone can follow, regardless of their technical skills.
I like the sound of simple. Hit me with it.
They suggested regular tire pressure checks, monitoring your AC filter, and keeping those sensors and cameras clean, especially if you live in an area with harsh weather conditions.
Okay, that sounds pretty manageable. Even for someone like me who's not exactly a car whiz.
Right, it's all about those small steps that can make a big difference in the long run.
And speaking of small steps, what about those times when you need a little more than just basic maintenance? Like if something actually goes wrong with your EV, where do you even take it to get fixed?
That's a great question. And it's one that sparked a lot of debate on Reddit. Some people swear by taking their EVs to the dealership, while others prefer independent shops.
So it's the classic dealership versus independent shop dilemma.
Pretty much, and honestly, there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
So what are the pros and cons of each option?
Well, dealerships often have specialized training and access to the latest software updates, which can be a big plus.
Yeah, that makes sense. Especially with EVs being so tech heavy.
Exactly. But independent shops can be just as knowledgeable, especially those that specialize in EVs, and they might offer more competitive pricing.
So it's all about doing your research and finding a reputable shop, whether it's a dealership or independent agents, that has a proven track record with EVs.
Exactly. Check online reviews, ask for recommendations from other EV owners. Those are always good starting points.
Once you've found a good shop, what else can you do to ensure a smooth repair experience?
One thing that came up repeatedly on Reddit was the importance of being proactive and asking the right questions.
Like what kind of questions?
Things like, what kind of experience do you have working with this specific EV model? Do you have access to the necessary parts and diagnostic tools? And what's your estimated turnaround time for repairs?
Okay, so it's all about being informed and not being afraid to advocate for yourself.
Exactly. And another tip I saw on Reddit was to document any issues you're experiencing with your EV before taking it in for repairs.
Like taking photos or videos or keeping a log of when the problem occurs.
Exactly. That way you have a record to refer back to, and it can help the technician diagnose the issue more accurately.
Smart thinking. So we've covered a lot of ground on EV maintenance today. But before we wrap up, are there any other Reddit-approved tips or tricks that you want to share with our listeners?
You know, one thing that I found really interesting was the whole concept of preconditioning your EV.
Preconditioning. I've heard that term before, but I'm not entirely sure what it means.
So basically, preconditioning is all about preparing your EV's battery and cabin for optimal performance, especially when it's very cold or very hot outside.
Okay, so it's like giving your EV a little pep talk before you hit the road, making sure it's ready to tackle whatever Mother Nature throws at it.
Exactly. In cold weather, preconditioning helps to warm up the battery, which can significantly improve its range and efficiency. And in hot weather, it can cool down the cabin before you get in, making your drive much more comfortable and saving you energy on air conditioning.
That's so cool. So how do you actually precondition an EV?
Most EVs these days have apps that allow you to control preconditioning remotely.
So you can basically tell your car to get ready to go from the comfort of your couch.
Yep. You can set a schedule for when you want your car to be prepped, ensuring that you're always greeted with a comfortable cabin and a happy battery.
That's amazing. Talk about futuristic convenience.
It really is. And speaking of technology, we can't forget about Tesla's Sentry Mode.
Sentry mode.
Yeah.
That sounds intriguing. Tell me more.
So Sentry Mode is essentially a high-tech security system that utilizes the car's external cameras to record any suspicious activity around the vehicle when it's parked and locked. It's like having a virtual bodyguard for your Tesla.
So someone tries to mess with your Tesla Sentry mode, we'll catch them in the act.
You got it. It's a great deterrent against potential vandals or thieves, and it can also provide valuable evidence if something does happen to your car.
That's awesome. But I've heard that Sentry mode can drain the battery. Is that true?
It can use some battery power, but Tesla has been working on making it more energy efficient. And there are tons of tips on Reddit about minimizing battery drain while still utilizing Sentry mode.
Like what? Give us the insider scoop.
Well, for example, many Tesla owners recommend only activating Sentry mode in areas where they feel it's truly necessary, like parking in unfamiliar or poorly lit locations. Others suggest adjusting the sensitivity settings to avoid unnecessary recordings triggered by, say, a curious squirrel or a gust of wind.
Okay, so it's all about finding that balance between security and preserving that precious battery life.
Exactly. And that's what I love about those Reddit discussions. You get these real-world tips and tricks that you might not find in a manual. It's like having a virtual community of Tesla experts at your fingertips.
I love that. So we've talked about batteries, brakes, general maintenance tips, dealerships versus independent shops, and even Tesla's Sentry mode. Is there anything else we need to know about keeping our EVs running smoothly?
One thing that we haven't touched on yet is the unique challenges of EV ownership right here in Quebec.
Oh yeah, Quebec. With our long winters and sometimes questionable road conditions, I can imagine that throws a few extra curveballs into the mix.
You got that right. And that's where those local Reddit communities like our Gatineau can be super helpful.
Okay, so let's tap into that local knowledge. What are some of the Quebec-specific EV challenges that people are talking about on Reddit?
Well, one thing that comes up a lot is the impact of cold weather on battery range.
Right. I've heard that cold temperatures can really zap your EV's mileage.
It's true. Batteries just don't perform as well in the cold. It's basic physics.
So what can you do about it?
Well, preconditioning definitely helps. And there are also things like keeping your tires properly inflated and avoiding using energy-intensive features like heated seats and steering wheels too much.
Okay, so it's all about being mindful of your energy consumption when it's freezing outside.
Exactly. And another thing that came up in those local Reddit threads was the issue of charging infrastructure, particularly in more rural areas.
Yeah, that makes sense. While cities are getting pretty well equipped with charging stations, there are still gaps in coverage in some parts of the province.
That's true. But there's good news on the horizon. The government is investing heavily in expanding the charging network. And there are also initiatives to encourage businesses and workplaces to install charging stations.
That's encouraging to hear. It seems like we're moving in the right direction.
We definitely are. And it's not just about infrastructure. There are also ongoing efforts to improve the sustainability of EV battery production.
Okay, that's a big one. What are people saying about that on Reddit?
I came across some really interesting discussions about the environmental impact of EV batteries. From sourcing raw materials responsibly to developing better recycling methods, it's a complex issue, but it's great to see that the EV community is actively engaged in finding solutions.
Absolutely. We can't just focus on the shiny new technology.
Yeah.
We need to consider the full life cycle impact of EVs.
Couldn't agree more. And that's what I love about those Reddit discussions. They bring together diverse perspectives and challenge us to think critically about the future of transportation. So we were talking about those Quebec-specific EV challenges. What are some of the things that people are bringing up on Reddit?
Yeah. Fill me in. What are our fellow Quebecers saying?
One thing that stood out was the sheer demand for EV repair services. Seems like everyone's going electric. But the availability of qualified technicians, it's still lagging behind.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a relatively new field, so it's understandable that the infrastructure is still playing catch up.
Right, and that's where doing your research, finding a good shop, it becomes even more important. You want to find a place that's got experience working with EVs specifically and uses certified technicians.
So don't just take your fancy electric car to any old mechanic down the street.
Right, exactly. You want someone who really knows these high-tech vehicles inside and out. Another thing that came up on Reddit was the whole parts availability issue. Some EV owners were saying they had to wait longer for repairs because of delays in getting parts, especially for the newer models.
Ugh, that's frustrating. But I guess it's to be expected with how quickly the EV industry is evolving.
It is, but a good shop. They'll be upfront about those potential delays and work with you to find solutions. They might even have loaner vehicles while you wait.
Okay, so patience is key when it comes to EV repairs, especially here in Quebec, while we're still building up that EV service network.
You got it. And speaking of Quebec-specific challenges, we can't forget about our lovely winters.
Oh yeah, winter definitely adds a few extra layers of complexity to EV ownership.
Yeah.
What were some of the issues that people were talking about?
Well, cold temperatures, they can really impact battery range. It's just basic physics, batteries. They don't perform as well when it's cold out. And some users, they were reporting problems with things like charging cables freezing up or door handles getting stuck.
Oh, wow. Sounds like a recipe for a not-so-fun morning.
It can be.
Oh,
But the great thing about Reddit is that you find all these clever workarounds and hacks that people have come up with. For example, one user suggested using a silicone-based lubricant on door seals and charging port covers to prevent them from freezing.
brilliant. I love that. People are so resourceful.
They really are.
Yeah.
So aside from those winter woes, what other unique challenges did EV owners in Quebec bring up on Reddit?
Yeah. What else is on their minds?
One recurring theme was the availability of charging infrastructure, particularly in those more rural areas. While cities are generally pretty well equipped with charging stations, there are still some gaps in coverage in certain parts of the province.
That makes sense.
Mhm.
Especially if you're thinking about taking a road trip or if you
Mm.
live outside of a major urban center.
Right, but the good news is the government is investing a lot in expanding that charging network. And there are also some initiatives to encourage businesses and workplaces to install charging stations.
That's good to hear. Sounds like we're on the right track.
I think so. And it's not just about the infrastructure. There's also a lot of work being done to improve the sustainability of EV battery production.
Hmm.
I was reading some really interesting discussions on Reddit about the environmental impact of those batteries.
Hmm.
From sourcing raw materials responsibly to figuring out better ways to recycle them. It's complicated, but it's great that the EV community is actively trying to find solutions.
Totally agree. It's not enough to just focus on the cool new technology. We've got to think about the whole life cycle impact of EVs.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And that's why these Reddit discussions are so valuable. They bring together all these different perspectives and get us thinking critically about the future of transportation.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from the nitty-gritty of battery care to those broader challenges and opportunities facing the EV industry. It's been an awesome journey, and it wouldn't have been possible without the collective wisdom of that Reddit community.
Big thanks to all those Redditors out there sharing their insights and experiences.
And of course, huge thanks to you, our listeners, for joining us on this electrifying adventure.
Until next time, keep those EVs rolling smoothly, and don't forget to tap into that amazing knowledge base of the internet. You never know what gems you might find.
Happy driving, everyone.